May the one who began a good work, may the one who began a good work, may the one who began a good work be faithful to complete it in you. As the early years went on, there was building program after building program, it sounds like. That little building was quickly getting overrun by members. So they, that building, the lot was purchased for $2,500. The lot, 7 lots that the church was built on, and so what else do you remember about those first years in the little building?
Well, I remember we always had a big deal of a Christmas party for the children.
Mm-hmm.
And Santa Claus came then, and he brought bags of candy and fruit for the children, and it was a great event for the community around. So I remember that distinctly, and then we always had a special minister to come to do what we called a week's revival, with special preaching.
Mm-hmm.
We did not have a kitchen in that building, and so when we had any sort of a meal, it was a picnic type.
Uh-huh. I remember singing in the children's choir in that first little building.
That's right, and we just had children's chairs, and you all just were up at the front, sitting facing the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
I remember at one time we had some little robes for you, little choir robes.
One interesting thing that this pointed out was that the first 47 members represented 26 families hailing from 21 different states. And that's very representative of the early population of Kingsport in those years because of people coming from so many different places. And I always thought that that was very enriching in our friends in school, and the fact that people came from so many different places. And I think it was very enriching for Waverly Road as well.
Oh, it was. We never did, I guess, sit down and figure what states people came from, but...
Well, you kind of knew.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of them anyway. The C's came from Georgia.
Yeah.
And the Brunners came from Michigan, I think.
Yes.
And anyway, those are kind of examples, but it did bring a lot of different points of view and perspectives and history.
Yeah.
Now, here's the list of the 3 first elders and 3 first deacons. The first elders were Irvin Rankin, Hall Morrison, Wilbur Kay, and the 3 deacons were Wayne Lee, Bob Hickey, and William Matheson. And so Reverend Curry had been called to be the first full-time pastor in 1947 after serving while still an associate at
Right.
First Presbyterian. We had there was a big women's auxiliary that was very busy with home mission projects and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the women were always very, very active. And I remember one time they kind of thought about having a bazaar to raise money. And one of the elders and his wife objected to that very strenuously. They said that we should just give gifts to the church. We shouldn't be selling things.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the end of bazaars or anything of
And
that.
that has held true for all these years, because so many other churches that that we're familiar with, right in Kingsport,
Yeah.
do a lot of fundraising projects and
Yeah.
things like that. The one thing, the women were big into having coffee get-togethers.
Oh, yeah. The social life was built around the church, really, a lot of it. And we would have these impromptu coffees. And on a certain morning, somebody would feel like, well, my house is clean enough this morning, I believe we'll have a coffee. So she'd get on the phone and you'd have what am I trying to say? Calling from,
A
round
call
robin.
list, yeah.
Yeah, and say, well, Jenny's gonna have coffee this morning. Come, and you just went to her house, and maybe we had cookies, and maybe we just had coffee, and the children played in the backyard while the mothers visited.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of that kind of fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, not very many of the moms were working. So we
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed a lot of different types of very simple fellowship.
Uh-huh. Well, and just about your whole group of friends would have been church members.
Yeah,
Pretty much.
yeah.
So, well, Reverend Curry and his family left to move to Scotland for graduate study in the end of 1948. And so another pulpit committee was rounded up, and in, let's see, June of 49, John MacKinnon came.
Yeah.
And I remember the McKinnons well, and I remember he had quite a sense of humor. He was,
He was very funny.
real funny. And Sarah, his wife, was, she was a neat lady too, I kind of remember.
They had their first child, and Sarah, was tall and slender,
Mm-hmm.
and she loved to walk. So you could always see her pushing her little boy in his stroller up Center Street, going a mile a minute. And in the summertime, she wore shorts, and some of the congregation felt she shouldn't be
Out walking in her short shorts.
short shorts.
I remember one story that John MacKinnon told later at one of the earlier anniversaries about going out to visit people in the neighborhood and inviting them to church. And he went to one house, and what was that lady's? Her name was Melba. I can't remember her last name.
Yeah.
But anyway, apparently her husband was off in the war, maybe, I guess.
Yeah, he was called up in the Korean War very early.
Well, anyway, so Melba was up on a ladder painting, and she had on shorts and a halter top and all this. And so anyway, he visited with her and chatted and invited her to church. And so one of the next Sundays, this fine-looking lady showed up in a hat and gloves and all dressed up. And he shook her hand at the end of the service and said how glad he was to see her. And but he didn't know who she was. And she said, well, don't you remember you came to visit me and invited me to church? And he said, oh, I didn't recognize you with your clothes on. But he was kind of a character.
He was.
Anyway, so he came in June of 49, and then pretty soon we were looking into building a new addition to the church. And initially it was going to be just a one-story addition, and then apparently this congregation of less than 100 members realized they weren't thinking big enough, so they came back and decided that they were going to build a much larger addition than originally planned. So this building, that now it's still, that building essentially is still there. It's where the gathering room and space and the part behind that, the offices are.
Yeah.
And then the second floor is where the old Presbyterian office was, and the youth area up there, and there's a kitchen up there. So that used to be a fellowship hall on the second floor, and then we had individual Sunday school rooms around there, and we would meet first, we'd have kind of an assembly, and then we'd separate off and go to our individual classes. And I remember in that building, Richard Dyer was one of the young people's Sunday school teachers, and Whit Langstaff, and Doris Carson are people that I remember that taught Sunday school to us up there. The early 50s is when Mr. Blackwood came to be minister of music and church secretary, according to this. I didn't remember that part. But I do remember Mr. Blackwood, and he had youth choirs, and I sang in those. And he was very stiff and serious and stern, and so that's what I remember about him. But apparently he got some reasonably good music out of us
Children.
children, which is hard to believe.